introduction. So my name is John Meredith. I am a trainer here at Sumo Logic, and I've been with Sumo Logic a little less than 2 years. It'll be 2 years in January, but I have been a trainer for a long, long time. So also I've worked as a DBA, a programmer, a network admin, did a couple stints as an IT manager, but always managed to go back to doing what I love doing best, which is teaching. So that's where we're here. And we're going to talk about observability administration. So not only am I here on this class, but I also want to give a chance to introduce my co-host, Zaragina. So Zaragina, did you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. With Zaragina here in Sacramento, California.
Okay. And then also I wanted to take this moment and introduce Nanda, right? Give Nanda a chance to introduce herself. Nanda was the one who wrote this course. So, and if you can imagine trying to take a concept like observability and build both the observability fundamentals class, which some of you may have had this morning, or maybe you'll have it later this week. And then also this observability administration class. She did a phenomenal job. So Nanda, say hi and take a bow, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nanda, based in Pune, India. I work in Doc team. I work as an instructional designer in Zaragina's team. Thank you for all of you being here. Welcome to the session. And as John says, let the party begin.
Okay. So excellent. Like I said, glad to have you guys all aboard. And I'm going to stop my streaming video. Sorry, hit the mute button by accident. And so just save a little bit of bandwidth here. So our game plan today is we are basically going to do 3 labs. And we're going to pretty much spend the 2 hours of doing these labs together. And these labs are going to take a little bit of work. Now, one of the questions is, and if you could raise your hands, this would really help me. But if you raise your hands, if you have an AWS account, if you can stand up AWS environments. So hopefully you have the ability under the reactions to raise your hand if you have that capability. So if you do, then you can certainly do these labs. If you don't have that capability, you're going to have a hard time doing these labs, and you'll probably spend a little time watching. So want to make sure you have a chance to do what you can do, but also understand that we're going to stand up an AWS environment, a couple of AWS environments. And so it helps if you have that capability. Again, this is all about how to set this stuff up. And that's what we're going to do. Now, the one ask I have of any of you, by the way, is if you've got a question, please feel free to ask it. As somebody who's been training for a long time, you know, if somebody has a question, chances are 3 groups of people benefit from the question. So the first thing is you get the answer to your question. So if you ask the question, hopefully you get the answer, and that answers things and lets you move smartly forward. The second people who benefit are the instructors. Your question helps us focus on what's important to you. So please, let's do that. Let's focus on what's important to you. The third group of people that benefit here are everybody else in the room. Because somebody asks a question, and before you know it, that gets someone else to think about, oh, that's right, I got a question in that area too. And so before you know it, we've covered things in a real interactive way, rather than me trying to do some sort of a poor Johnny Carson monologue. I realize I'm showing my age with that comment, by the way. So great. Okay, super. So that being said here, we're going to focus on these 3 things. We're going to do an AWS Observability Setup. So if you've seen our AWS fundamentals class, you know that we've got dashboards and we've got collectors and we've got all this stuff that lets you see inside your AWS environment. Sounds like somebody's got their mic open. Is there a question? Is there a question, folks? If not, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. Okay. There we go. All right, so then we're going to talk about Kubernetes and basically trying to collect data through Kubernetes. And we'll talk about Kubernetes setup and structure and all that stuff. As we go through this, you're going to find there's a lot of information in the slides that make wonderful test questions. And so I'm going to try to help you with those test questions. And I'm going to show you where you can get a copy of the slides and get some of that information to make it easy for you to take that test. And then the last piece of this is that we want to set up tracing, and we do that typically in the application layer area. And so we're going to talk about, first of all, turning on tracing with Kubernetes. And then we're going to talk about setting up an environment where we're going to do tracing. Then we'll wrap things up, and that'll, like I said, take about 2 hours. And then we're going to focus on the exam. And the exam is 20 questions, passing a score of 70. And I look forward to you all taking it after this class so that you can get certified. And we've got a couple of offers and things to help inspire you to take that exam here today. And I'll talk about that when we get there. Okay. In fact, one of them is right here. Normally this is at the end of the deck, but that's okay. If you take the exam and pass it today, after the class here, you can send an email to training@sumologic.com with your certificate, and we will send you a $15 Uber Eats voucher. Okay. Now, please understand, we got a lot of people today taking lots of classes, so it could take up to a couple of days for us to get this voucher to you. But if you send us the email with a copy of your certificate and tell us who to send the Uber Eats voucher to, we can. The other thing, I want to be completely transparent, and that is, obviously, we've got a relationship with Uber Eats here in the United States, and Uber Eats exists in some of the countries, but I understand Uber Eats does not exist right now in India. There is other companies we're trying to work with, but we haven't done so yet. So if you're not in the United States, or if you're not in a country that has Uber Eats, it might be hard for us to get you that reward for your, for your area. Okay. But again, you got to take the exam and you get to pass the exam. And my job is to try to help you to pass the exam. Another offer that we have, before Illuminate, we had 6 certifications, 6 certification classes. Now at Illuminate, we're adding 4 more. We added the fundamentals, the AWS Observability Fundamentals class, which, like I said, I taught a little bit earlier this morning. It'll be taught later today, be taught tomorrow. We also have Cloud SIM Fundamentals and Cloud SIM Admin, as well as this course. So now we have 10 certifications. And if you pass 6 Sumo Logic certifications, then we will send you a backpack. And so we call it the Sumo 6 offer. Now, again, I want to be completely honest. I want to be completely transparent here. Okay. If you're in the United States, we can ship inside the United States. That's very easy. No taxes, no immigration fees, none of that stuff. All right. If you're in India or some other place, the shipping costs may be a bit prohibitive, but more importantly, you get to pay taxes and duty on that backpack, which isn't something I'm sure you want to do. So these are where we get into the little issues. And I wanted you to, understand, we certainly want to give you a backpack if you go to the effort and do that. But I want you to realize that depending on where you are in the world, there could be some ramifications. Okay. Anyway, but that's a special promotion offer we're offering today. So again, focus is on these 3 areas. And so let's get this party started. Right. We think in terms of application infrastructure, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform. Well, our focus here is on AWS. So across our AWS environment, where we've got a ton of microservices and various data sources and various other things, I want to see across that. And if you ever try to look at through the AWS console on your AWS environment, it's really kind of hard to see which microservices are connected to which microservices and things like that. With our AWS Observability Solution, you can see through that. Obviously, our focus here is to try to set it up so that you can see it. So let's talk about AWS observability challenges and our solution and how it fits, right? So when you're looking at your AWS environment, it takes a while to get it operational, right? You got to install your AWS environment, then you got to start building queries and dashboards and all that stuff. It takes a while to be able to get operational data out of this. It also takes some time to get your security insights. People are logging in, where they're logging in from, all that fun stuff. This, like I said, takes time. The other thing is relating to the various microservices and things that are in your AWS environment, being able to diagnose and isolate the elements that you want to both monitor and keep an eye on can be very time consuming and be very hard to do. again, you'll find our solution will take care of that. And then, of course, the time taken to troubleshoot, resolve, and mitigate across your microservices could be challenging. So our AWS solution, when you spin up an AWS environment, we're going to install a bunch of extra dashboards and a bunch of things for you so that you can see transparently across your environment. We're going to provide a framework to simplify the monitoring and troubleshooting of this environment. We're going to identify elements subject to specific operational issues, security threats, and vulnerabilities. And we're obviously going to reduce the time it takes to get operational and security insights. And I'll say that we get that down to probably 20 minutes before you start getting some data. Now, how do we do this? Well, we're going to use a Cloudformation template. So we're going to take advantage of AWS's Cloudformation. We're going to go out and find a AWS Cloudformation template that we've created at Sumo. And you can save this locally or in your S3 bucket. And we're going to use that Cloudformation to be able to create a stack based on your template, based on what you need configured, based on the applications and stuff that you want to run. So this Cloudformation template gives us the ability to declare the AWS resources we want to create and configure. We also will create and set up your automation of collection of logs and metrics. So we'll set up the collectors, we'll set up the sources, all that stuff will be done for you automatically. We're also going to install out-of-the-box dashboards in Sumo Logic. We will install our AWS Observability app as well as explore things so that you can see things. You also get a chance to, as you go through this template, to declare any objects you want and set up any name value pairs for your AWS environment. So for example, maybe you want to charge this AWS environment off to certain business units. You may create a name called business unit, and then the value might be, this is our finance team, or this is our accounting team, or this is our marketing team, wherever you're going to charge that off to, so that you can search by those name value pairs. You can see how that stuff breaks down. The other thing that's really kind of nice is that we're going to basically build your stack. And when we declare the top level object, it's going to build all the dependencies for us. And when we want to perhaps remove this stack, we no longer need the stack. All we have to do is remove the top level object and it will remove all the dependencies. So it makes it very, very easy to create and maintain this environment. Now, what's a stack? Well, a stack typically are all the resources that you need to run whatever it is you want to run. In our case, we're going to run a web application. But, what things do I need? So we're going to use this AWS Cloudformation template. We're going to fill it out. It basically consists of a JSON text file. Then we're going to use the power of AWS and Cloudformation to create our stack. That will create our S3 buckets. That will create our databases, create our services, create our resources, and does whatever the heck we need it to do. As I said, when we're done with this, we can also dispose of it, and it will clean up all those resources and all that information for us as well. So it's going to make it very easy to build out this AWS solution. And not only building out the AWS side of it, but the Sumo Logic side as well. Now, as far as deploying this AWS solution, and in a minute, I'll talk to you about supporting documentation and all that stuff. But this particular slide, as it builds out, makes a great couple of test questions. So under prerequisites, there are certain prerequisites we got to have. One, you got to have the ability to generate an AWS environment. You need to have an AWS account, right? We need to make sure that on the Sumo side, the account you're using in Sumo, you have certain permissions to be able to deal with. We need to be able to correlate certain details. Like I said, make sure you've got certain rights and things like that. We need to specify what deployment region do you want to deploy this in. I happen to be on the US East Coast, so US East 1 works fine for me, right? So where do you want to deploy this? Those are our 4 prerequisites. Then after our prerequisites, we get to configure this. We get to give this thing an AWS account alias. What do we want to call this? What apps, what alerts, and what things do we want to set up? We want to add our CloudWatch metric sources and our automatic load balancing log sources. So we'll configure it. Then we have an optional parameters section where we can add things like CloudTrail or CloudWatch logs, or what our root cause explorer sources are going to be. Then finally, we are going to throw the switch and say create and verify. We're going to select checkboxes on the capabilities section, click create the stack. It is then going to create the stack. It'll take probably about 20 minutes to create it, but we'll do something else while that's happening. We'll come back and take a look at it. And then we'll confirm that everything is where it is. Our data is there. We are, in fact, ready to go. Now, I mentioned to you that some of our slides hold test questions. So I wanted to tell you where you can get that information. Back in here in our Illuminate portal, right? Back in our Illuminate portal, you'll see there's a section here called resources. So if you go into this resource center, and if you filter it by training, we have put in here all the slides for all of our classes that we're doing today and tomorrow, okay? So here is the Observability Admin Guide, which I'm about to give you. Here is the slide deck that we have. Now, this is a PDF document of the slides, but it'll still work for your exam. Also, when we get around to taking the exam, if you get stuck on a question, if you need me to display a slide for you or help you, please feel free to let me know, okay? We want to make sure we want to make this extremely fair for you, and we want to make sure you have an opportunity to pass and pass well. So any questions so far? I'll take that silence as a no, nothing yet. But again, as I'm going through here, don't hesitate to interrupt me if you've got questions. What we'd like you to do is we'd like you to log into our Sumo Logic environment, but this time we want you to log in with admin accounts, okay? So first of all, fire up your Google Chrome or Firefox browser if you don't mind, and type in for the URL service.sumologic.com. That's service.sumologic.com. Then it's going to ask for an email address and it's going to ask for a password. Before you pick the email address, what I'd like you to do is pick a 3-digit number, anywhere from 001 to 999. And whatever 3-digit number you pick, I'd like you to type in the chat box. That way we know what number you're going to use, okay? So feel free to type in the chat box. I will pick a number, by the way, just to be fair here, and I will send it to everyone. And I am going to grab 603. You may ask, why do I want 603? That's the area code here in New Hampshire. So a state has the same area code, all the phones, and so I'm going to go ahead and grab that. Okay. Additionally, in the chat box right now, I am uploading our lab guide. So it's in the process of uploading right now. It'll be in the chat box here in a couple of seconds. And then you can download it from the chat box. And if you can't download it from the chat box, again, I remind you that you can go out to the Illuminate portal in that resources section under training, and you can find the lab guide there, okay? Now, once you've picked your number, and it looks like everybody's typed in a number here, what I want you to do is log in as training plus admin with that 3-digit number at sumologic.com. Bear with me a second here, folks. I'm going to take this information, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it in the chat box. Sometimes it's easy to copy and paste than it is to type. And then the password for these accounts, the current password is capital SUMO 2021 exclamation mark. And that password will change in October. It changes every month. I don't know what the October password is going to be, but this is how you can do administrative things in our environment. So let me go ahead here and let me log into service.sumologic.com. And if you've been in other classes, you may have logged in as training plus analyst. Well, here, we want you to log in as training plus admin. And as I said, I'm going to take number 603 at sumologic.com. And then the password, again, is capital SUMO 2021 exclamation mark. Let me show it to you so you can see it. And then you should be able to log in. And now you're logging in with administrative rights, okay? I'm going to close up that little thing there, and I'm going to get rid of some of this other stuff. So we are going to go ahead and use this account to do various things. So I'd like to make sure you all get logged in. So if you're logged in, please raise your hand. If you're having problems logging in, please let us know what the problem is. So raise your hand once you're all logged in. And I've got 7 folks with their hands raised, okay, out of about 18 or so. I've got 8 folks, 8 folks, so not quite half the class, but we're getting there. And I realize that sometimes the day job gets in the way and you're distracted, so you're in the class, but your mind's someplace else, and I understand that. That's fine. I don't expect 100% participation. All right, I've got 9 folks with their hands up, and it looks like that's what we're going to get. Are any of you having any problems trying to log in? Anybody having any issues? Okay. I'll take that as a no. All right. So good. I'm going to assume I've got what I've got, and I've got what I'm going to get. And so that should take care of that. If you all wouldn't mind lowering your hands, I'd appreciate it. And first thing I want to do here is I want to show you some of our documentation. Now, you can in Sumo Logic go into this navigation panel over here to the left, okay? And you can go into help and you can click documentation. And that will take you into our product documentation. Great, no problems. And here are all the various chapters of our product documentation. You can also get here by bringing up a new tab and typing in help.sumologic.com. So if you want to do this old school and type in the URL, it's help.sumologic.com. All right. Now, if I scroll down here, under our observability solution, this chapter talks about our AWS Observability Solution. And it talks about how to set up collection for our AWS Observability Solution and that sort of thing. So you'll find that some of the questions may reference some of the documentation. And so you'll find that there's some very good documentation here to set things up on how we do this. Okay, on how to set up our AWS Observability Solution. Okay, that takes us to our public facing site, which is not necessarily where I want it to go. Okay. Go back to the previous page. There we go. So again, you can go through here and this will talk about here. I'm looking for the AWS Observability Solution here and how we set this up. Now, the reason I'm going here, it says here, before you deploy, there's some prerequisite information. What Sumo Logic metrics do you want to have that are not part of our AWS observability, right? What Sumo Logic collectors and sources do you want to have? Your Sumo Logic account needs to have certain role capabilities, needs to have these privileges to be able to do this. You're also going to need a Sumo Logic access ID and key to make this work. And as I mentioned before, you're going to have an AWS credentials account. Going to need to log into AWS so that you can see this, okay? Now, the accounts that you have all the privileges. That's been taken care of. So the role capabilities is done. For our purposes in this class, I'll talk about these, but we're going to go with the standard defaults for metrics, collectors, and sources. So that's done, okay? But what we do need to do is we do need to grab the Sumo Logic. You need to create a Sumo Logic access ID and key, all right? So let's talk about that. So you're logged in here to your admin account. And if you open up your navigation pane here on the left, and you click on your account down here, you will see there's a section called Preferences. And here in Preferences, you can, I can, we can add an access key. Now, why do we need this access key? We're going to have the AWS Cloudformation Template do some things on Sumo Logic, and it's going to do it using these access keys and IDs. All right, that's why we need them. So to create this access key, we're going to click on create access key. We're going to give this thing a name. I'm going to type JWM, which are my initials, and then underscore illuminate. Okay. Just so I know what this key is for. And I don't need to worry about this allow list cores domain because I don't need, I have access to my environment. I don't need to create and put something on an allow list to make this happen. So I can easily get from AWS to Sumo without any problems. So I'm going to click on create key. Now, this is going to create an access ID and an access key. And these access IDs and access keys can be used time and time again for automated things, programmatic things. However, when I click done here, and please don't click done, I will never see the access key again. So now is the time for me to take this access ID, copy it, go out and bring up a text editor somewhere. So let me fire up a text editor. Grab a new text file. And I am going to paste in my access ID. Then I'm going to go down here to my access key. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to paste that into my text file. Now, so you've generated an access ID, you've generated an access key. Now I can click done. And since I mentioned it to you, if I go into this JWM Illuminate key that I created and I click on the pencil, I don't see the access key at all. Again, won't see it. So if you forget where your access key is, you have to go ahead and create another one, okay? But here is my access ID and here is my access key. One other thing, if your company's security requirements say that whenever you generate like some sort of an access ID or access key, that you must put it in some sort of a file somewhere, then you follow your company's policies, okay? But I'm just, again, for the purpose of this training, we're generating a Sumo logic access key and an access ID that we can use. Now, while we're here, there's one other thing that we need. Here, we need our organization ID. When you and I set up our Sumo logic environment, our AWS environment, it's going to add some things to our training environment. It needs to know what this training environment organizational ID is. So you can either copy it from here, or since you're an administrator, you can click on administrator, click on account, and you can copy it from there. It's the same thing. But you need to copy our organization ID. Okay. So it puts it into the right environment. The other thing that you need to know is what region is this in? Whether you know it or not, Sumo Logic runs on AWS. So what AWS region are we in? Normally, you could look at the URL and you would see US1, US2, US West 1, whatever. You see different things. This URL doesn't tell us. I will tell you that this comes from US East 1. So this is actually US East 1 is where our Sumo Logic environment is. And we'll need to know that a little later on when we get into the template. Any questions so far? This is probably the hard stuff. All right, so let me go back to my guide here. Let me hang on a second. Where did my guide go? Okay, so as far as lab 1, what we need to do is there's some prerequisite information we need, right? We need to have our role capabilities. We need to make sure that we've got an access ID. You need to log into your AWS environment, okay? Now what we're going to do here is we created our access key. We've got our organization ID here. Now we're going to click on the AWS Observability Doc Page. So I'm going to click on this. It's going to show me my AWS Observability Doc Page. Only this isn't the right one. Hang on a second. There we go. There we go. Good. This is the right URL. And if you don't mind, I'm going to copy and paste and put it in the chat box because you're going to want to go here. You're going to want to go to this URL. Okay. And this is talking about deploying our AWS environment. And again, we talked about our prerequisites, some of the things we need, all that. But step one says open the Cloudformation template. And you need to make sure that you're signed into your AWS account. I have to be signed in up here, so I'm good. And ultimately, what we're going to do here is where it says click this URL. I'm going to click this URL. This is going to open up, take me into my AWS environment through my credentials. And it's going to show me this lovely Cloudformation template. Okay, no problem. Yep. Somebody needs a copy of the document. It's going up, being posted up again. Also, the login credentials are different than the previous class. We're logging in as admins now. So we copy that information. There we go. Okay. So for those of you who came in late, hopefully you got that information. So here is our Cloudformation template. It's created by Sumo Logic. It's our AWS Observability Master Template.yaml file. And first, it's going to ask us a couple of simple questions. First question is, what do we want to call this stack name? When we create the stack, what do we want to call it in AWS? And it says it can include letters, capital, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and dashes. I'm going to create my initials here, and then I'm going to put a dash, and today is the 28th, so I'm going to put 28. Okay, I just want to make sure it has a unique thing. So, or I could say, you know, I'll even put in here Illuminate, because this is for Illuminate. I'm going to give it a name. No spaces, just dashes, letters, and numbers. Now here for my parameters, my parameters, it wants to know where is the Sumo Logic deployment. Our training Sumo Logic deployment is US1. That's where it is, US1. Okay. Then it wants our access ID and our access key. So I'm going to get rid of what's here. Remember earlier we created an access ID and an access key. I'm going to copy that from my text file, paste it, take my access key. By the way, somebody's got their microphone open, so if there's a question, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, I encourage you to mute, or I'll mute you. So I pasted in my access ID and my access key. Okay. Are there any questions so far? All right. Then it wants my organization ID. That was that number that we copied out before. Yours will be the same as mine. This one right here. This is our Sumo Logic training environment. And we want to install this AWS observability app and stuff on our training environment. Okay, bear with me a second. Okay, just muting some folks because I'm hearing some background noise. Okay, then down here it says, look, when we delete the stack, do you want me to delete the Sumo Logic resources? And we're going to leave the default as true. Yes, we are. True works. That's exactly what we want. Then it wants an AWS account alias. In other words, when we install things in Sumo Logic, what do we want to call this? And I recommend you put your initials in here in lowercase, okay? And then you can't have spaces in here. It's real temperamental about what you put in here. So lowercase, and then I'm going to also put in here today's date, which is the 28th. Okay? Just some unique marker, and you'll see where we see that unique marker in just a second. And then they've added this new feature here, object URL of the CSV file that maps AWS account IDs to account aliases. We don't need that. Okay, it's not required for us. So we got the question. Okay, good. Thank you, Henry. Okay. And then we're basically going to go through here and it says, do I want to install the AWS Observability apps and alerts? Yes or no? I'm going to install it. Sure, that's the reason we're doing this. We're installing the AWS Observability apps and alerts to Sumo Logic. Where are my CloudWatch metrics? Are they CloudWatch metric source, Kinesis, Firehose metric source? We're just going to go with the default here. And then what namespaces do I want to create? And again, we're going to simply take the defaults. If there's additional metrics that you wanted to bring in here that you're using a source API URL for, you would put that URL API in here for. So basically you're defining your metrics. Then we're defining our AWS automatic load balancing log sources. And basically we're saying, look, when I install this, do you want me to apply ALB access logging to new things or existing things, or both? And we're going to choose both. Now we're obviously creating this, so there's nothing there that already exists. But as we add new things, as we change our AWS environment out, it'll capture that and add our AWS account logging to Sumo Logic, add those new things that we add. And do I want to create my ALB log sources? And yes, because I don't have anything there. Again, do I want to use some API URLs for my ALB log sources? If I've got some in my environment that I want to use, you can. We're not going to worry about this in this example. And then what bucket name do you currently have? Again, we haven't stood anything up, so we don't have a bucket name. If you leave it blank, it'll create a new bucket for you. Path expressions. Again, these are path expressions that it's going to use as far as finding things, tagging things, that sort of thing. Just let it go. Then I get into my AWS Cloud Source Trail. Do I want to install my Cloud Trail log source as part of my AWS? Yes, I do. Again, what URL API? We're going to leave that blank. We're going to leave the S3 bucket name blank. It will create a new bucket for us. And then it'll create our path expressions that are here. We're just going to go with the standard defaults for right now. Then as far as my AWS Lambda CloudWatch log sources, again, it's going to use my Kinesis Firehose log sources. Again, I could add others if I want to from our URL API. And do I want to subscribe this information to my CloudWatch log forwarder and send it to Sumo Logic? Yes, I do. My regex statement for my Lambda logs, it'll all have the word Lambda in it. That's what we're going to search for. And then do I want to install my inventory source, my X-ray source, or both of my root cause explorer sources? And we're going to go with both. So we filled in a couple of things early on, but basically we're going to go with the standard defaults for the rest of it. Now, I'm going to check these check marks. Yes, I'm acknowledging I'm creating something. And then I'm going to tell it to create the stack. And now it is going to go out and create this JWM Illuminate stack. And if I refresh it from time to time, I will see that it's starting to build out my stack. And it should just build it out. It'll take about 20 minutes or so, and it will build out the stack. Now, what is this doing? If I go into my Sumo Logic environment, it's going to do a couple things for me. And in a little while, we'll come back and look at this. But under Manage Data, under my collectors, if I search for my initials, I will see that back here on the 16th, it automatically created for me my collector, my hosted collector, and all of these sources. So when I use this Cloudformation template, it stood up an AWS environment and built out all these sources for me. And I'm getting data for this without any problems. That's what this shows me. Additionally, if I go into my Explorer tab in about 20 minutes, I will see that under AWS Observability, again, I can see my JWM 16 that I previously had created. And so here are some dashboards that are being populated by my setting up my AWS observability. So it automatically installs these dashboards, configures these dashboards, and displays the data of these dashboards. Okay. And if you act right now at no extra charge, it will also put in your personal folder an AWS dashboard, our AWS observability application with all these pre-built dashboards so that you can see across your AWS environment. And my advice is I would click on the overview tabs first, and then you could look at, some specific information here or whatever you need to look at with regards to your EC2, your elasticity, your RDS, all of this fun stuff. So you can see how things are going. So as I said, in about 20 minutes, when we come back, we'll look and we'll see that we've got another folder up here. That's here. You'll see that we're going to have another option under our Explore and all that fun stuff. But right now, AWS needs a little time to build this out. So we'll come back and revisit that in just a little bit. Are there any questions? All right. Well, good news. That takes care of lab one. We will come back and we will verify this in just a little bit. But that takes care of lab number one. Okay. By the way, in case you're wondering, I'm going to go through lab number two, and there's a part of lab number two that takes a bit of time. And during that time is when I'm going to put us on a break. So give me about probably 20, 25 minutes, and then we'll get a break. So in case you're wondering. Now, what is lab two and what are we basically doing? You scroll down to the appropriate slides here. By the way, I remind you about this lovely lab recap slide because you're going to see some great test questions here, right? Certain things you get to drag and drop in here, right? Based on the answers. So it's a handy, again, our exams are open book, open note, all that stuff. Now, the second piece of this is we want to, now that we've got an AWS application, now we want to play with Kubernetes. And so now Kubernetes, of course, is on a different layer, and we want to take advantage of Kubernetes. Now, for those of you who have Kubernetes installed and you want to add the data from Kubernetes into Sumo Logic, when we go through lab two here, there's a lot of steps that we do, but most of those steps are to build a Kubernetes cluster. If you already have a Kubernetes cluster, and you probably do, the steps to bring them into Sumo Logic is very easy. There's just 2 or 3 steps and it's done. But in our class, we've got to build a Kubernetes cluster first. So as we go through lab two, you're going to find it's a bit laborious. The other thing I want you to be aware of is when you bring Kubernetes into Sumo Logic, you're going to be ingesting a lot of stuff. And so I don't know how your ingestion process is set up. I don't know what your ingestion budgets are, all that, but I want you to be aware that this could add some charges and stuff like that. So I just want you to be aware you're bringing in lots of stuff, you're ingesting more material, therefore it might change your bill. And you might want to adjust your partitions and other things to offset that. Okay. So as far as Kubernetes setup goes, those are familiar with Kubernetes, know that we've got a cluster, right? In that cluster, you've got one master node. You've at least got one worker node, maybe 2. Is there a question? Somebody raised their hand. So if there's a question, feel free to unmute your mic and ask your question, please. Culver, is there a question? Okay. So if you got any questions at any time, feel free to unmute your mic, ask your question. So inside these worker nodes, you have pods, and then you've got various containers. Your microservices are these little containers that are there. And Kubernetes will, grab and create other worker nodes as necessary to offload work. It'll grab resources it needs to. If you decide to install a new application, it will take care of deploying the application across the worker nodes. It is really quite a marvelous, marvelous thing, okay? Now, Kubernetes is not necessarily an AWS thing. All cloud products use Kubernetes. So whether it's Google Cloud Platform, Azure, AWS, they all use Kubernetes, and you can take advantage of the various applications that help you manage Kubernetes. Now, what we are going to use for installing Kubernetes on our product is we're going to use Helm. And Helm is the open standard by which we can then grab the Kubernetes information and bring it into Sumo logic. So regardless of the various applications that you might run, it's going to be managed through our Helm environment that we're going to be able to see this information. So we want to look at the worker nodes, right? We also may want to look at the master nodes. We have an application called the master node control plane, which sees the master node, doesn't see the worker nodes. We also have a Kubernetes app that sees the worker nodes. So we got two different apps, depending on if we talk about the master node control plane, or you're talking about the worker nodes. And again, in your Kubernetes environment, you want to be able to monitor and troubleshoot the health and well-being of these things, the replication, load balancing, hardware allocation resources, all of that stuff. And you'll be able to see that through our environment, okay? All right. So that's basically how Kubernetes goes. And again, I just want to be fair. When you bring in Kubernetes, like I said, you are going to see an increase in your ingestion. So just want to be fair about that. Now, as I said, we got two different apps in Sumo logic. There's the Kubernetes app, which looks at your worker nodes and the containers and the pods. Then you've got your Kubernetes control plane app, which deals with the master node and managing of those worker nodes. Now, here's another great slide that makes some wonderful test questions. So out here in Kubernetes, okay, Culver, is there a question, sir? I'm assuming it's a sir. If you got your question, feel free to ask. Unmute your mic and ask your question, or type in the chat box, whichever you prefer. Okay. All right. So here in our Kubernetes environment, you've got logs, you've got events, you've got metrics, you've got traces, you got security. And so we're going to take information from these various aspects from your Kubernetes environment, and through Helm, we are going to bring them in to Sumo logic. Now, Helm allows us to take your logs through FluentBit. You'll see a test question here. Logs through FluentBit, takes your events through FluentD, takes your metrics through Prometheus, takes your traces and trace data through Open Telemetry, and it takes your security information through Falco or Falco Plus. And so in Helm, when we set up our Helm, these are the collection mechanisms that we're going to use. And so then all this data is going to come in here, and we are going to enrich it with the name of the service, the name of the deployment, the name of the namespace, the node, the pod, the container, and any other key value pairs that you'd like to add. So we can search by deployment, we can search by node, we can search by container, and any other key value pairs that you want. So again, we start with our logs. We start with our basic stuff coming from Kubernetes. We're going to take it in through Helm and the various collection mechanisms here. Then we get to enrich it, and there you go. Some best practices here, right? To use Kubernetes log and metric data effectively, you must define the fields like cluster, container, deployment, host. Define those namespace, those fields, those key value tags. Okay. You can also add additional fields to define key value pairs. For example, like I said, this environment might be for a specific business unit. Maybe you want to create a key value pair of business unit equals, and then accounting or marketing or whoever you're charging it off to. Okay. Sumo can automatically pause some of your Kubernetes if you need to set these fields up correctly first. And then again, remember that we created a Sumo logic access ID and key. We're going to need that. We're going to need that information as we go through this process. Okay. And that's going to bring us in here to lab number 2. Okay. So here in lab number 2, we need to install some Kubernetes tools. So let me go back out to my directions here for lab 2, setting up observability. we need to create and deploy a Kubernetes cluster. Now, these directions were written for a Mac, which is typically what everybody at Sumo Logic has. If you're on a Windows machine, then you probably want to launch PuTTY, okay? If you're on a Mac, you can launch Terminal. And so what's going to happen is the first thing we need to do is install Homebrew on your computer, whether it's on a Mac or a PC. And the command is right here to do so. Now, one little thing about the commands you need to be careful of. When I copy these commands and I paste them, and I open up Terminal in my case, for example, here, if I paste them, you'll see that some of the command didn't take real well, okay? And so what happens is if you take it out and put it to a text editor, you'll see that it did a word wrap right there, and it also didn't get the last part of the command, this right here. And so this is where the fun begins when we're dealing with a PDF document. .sh. That's a parenthesis and a double quote. Okay, so this is what the command should look like. And when you run that command, for example, if I run that command right now in my terminal, it's going to tell me this is already installed. So bear with me a second. It's going to tell me it's already there. It may ask you for a password. Okay. And then it will go ahead and start installing Homebrew. Now I had Homebrew installed on here. It looks like it's going to try to upgrade my Homebrew. And this will take a few minutes. This is why this lab takes a long time. So it's going to install Homebrew for me. And then, oops, excuse me, let me go back to that previous page. Then we want to install using Homebrew, we want to install the AWS command line interface. So on the bottom of page 19, step 3, we want to copy that code, and that code will copy just fine. So let me wait till this is all done, and then I'll go ahead and copy it, paste it in, and run. Okay, it's all done. Now I can take the next command. I can run it. Now, again, as I said before, if you've already got a Kubernetes cluster installed, you don't really have to do all this stuff. You probably already have these command lines there. Okay. So we're just going to go ahead and create some stuff here. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to page 20. And next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and configure our AWS default profile. This AWS default profile is going to answer the questions of who are we and what are we trying to access. Say, is there a question, sir?
Yeah. Do you have any documentation for for Windows, or is it only for Mac? Do you have?
Good question. Right now, the lab exercises here were written for a Mac. However, I suspect if you use PuTTY, these commands should still work. If you're on a Windows machine and you use PuTTY, they should work just fine. But no, we have not built them yet for a Windows machine.
Gotcha, no problem. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm sorry, but you asked a good question. I want to be honest. All right. So again, as I said, I'm going to install the command line, which I just did. Hang on a second. Oops. Okay, I installed that command line. So now I want to do this AWS configure. And this AWS configure is going to ask me some questions. So the first question it wants to know, again, this is an AWS application. It wants my AWS access key, not my Sumo Logic access key, but my AWS access key. So if I go back here to my AWS account, and if I go back in here to my users, okay, there's my user. There's the user that I use, Jay Meredith. And if I go into my security credentials, here is where I can add an access key. This is just like the Sumo Logic access key, except now it's for AWS. All right. And you'll notice I have two access keys. Here's the access ID, and then the access key is embedded in this, just like it is with Sumo. When you create an access key, it'll get you an access key and an access ID. And I have already, if you want to create one of these, you can, but I've already added my access ID and my access key here. So that's why I'm seeing the remnants of this command. If you don't have an access ID and access key, you'll want to create one. And then you're going to copy and paste those into some text file somewhere so you can copy and paste them into here. So it's asking you for your AWS access key and access ID. So I can log in on your behalf for AWS. Then it wants to know what default region name. And for the purpose of this exercise, I don't care what region you're in. If you would, please use US West 1, we would appreciate it. So US West 1 is going to be that value. And then finally, the next question it's going to ask you is, what's the output format? And there we want you to type in JSON, all lowercase. And you've now set up your default profile. So now when I do commands inside here dealing with AWS, it's going to use my profile settings to spin up this environment. It's going to spin up this environment in US West 1 using my access key and my access ID. Any questions about that? All right. Now, since it's got my credentials, I am going to run an AWS command here to see my S3 buckets. So on page 21, there's a little command up here at step 5. I'm going to take that command. I'm going to paste it down here. Oops, excuse me. Thought I was going to copy it and paste it. Hang on. There we go. And I want to see if I can access those buckets. And obviously I can't. So that tests out my credentials. That tests out my profile. We're in good shape. If I can't access those credentials, something's wrong with our configuration profile. Then I want to install the command line for setting up my cluster. So brew install my my cluster, Kubernetes cluster product, command line cluster product right here. And so it's going to go through and install all of that. All right, so it looks like it's already installed. Life is good. Then if I want to, here I can run the -- help on this command. Again, I could copy it, but let's do this. EKSCTL -- help. And if I run it, I should get a manual pages that tells me that it's installed, working great. Okay. Then that takes us to page 22. Say, is there another question? Where I want to install my Kubernetes command line interface. And I realize this is getting a little bit boring, if you will, as we go through these lovely command lines. And then here I am going to install Helm. So I'm going to run a brew command, homebrew command to install Helm. And then finally, we're going to create our cluster. Now, in this cluster, this command has some difficulty. So let me try to swipe it and grab it. And let me give you guys a clean command of this, because this just does not. Actually, I'll tell you what. I have it on another text file. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. There we go. Okay. Here is my command. And I'm going to copy and put this into your chat box to make it easy for you all if you're following along with me. However, one thing you need to change. You need to change the name of this. Right now, we're naming this KAS-training-lab-JWM. I would prefer that you put your own initials in there and take out the JWM. Okay. So I'm going to go to my terminal. I'm going to paste this in. Additionally, on mine, just so you guys know, I'm going to modify my environment here to JWM 28 and stay as the 28th. So we can make sure things are running properly. And when I run this, this is the command that takes about 20 minutes. So I'm going to let this command run. Like I said, it's going to take about 20 minutes. While this command is running, first of all, has everybody got it running that's trying to run it? I'll take that as a yes. While this command is running, if I go into my Sumo logic environment, again, the password is capital Sumo 2021 exclamation mark for these admin accounts. Now, if I go in here and if I look at my managed data and if I look at my collection and if I do a search or you do a search by your initials or whatever you call it, your stack name, you should now see, here it is, JWM 28. So remember when we did lab 1, we created an environment, AWS Observability Environment. It created all these sources. And if I want to, I can just click one of the sources here and I can see I'm getting log data here, okay? Let me close all these up just to make things a little cleaner. So you can see, you should be able to see here. Let's type in JWM 28. Okay, there is my collector and there is my sources. And you should see your initials, whatever you called your stack, you should see that as well. Then also, if I go in here to explore, under AWS Observability, here is JWM 28. Here's a couple of others that got created as well. And if I go into my JWM 28, US East 1, I'm starting to see some data here, okay? For example, there I am up here in New Hampshire, right? Somebody else is down here, a bunch of folks are down here are doing other things. But I can start seeing where things are starting to come from. I can look at my Lambda information to see the AWS environment that we've stood up. Some of this doesn't have any data yet. We just got to be patient. But I can see my Explorer. And oh, by the way, there's other things in here. Accounts of interest, other dashboards. I can see, like I said, my root cause Explorer here doesn't have any data yet, but it's there, it's installed, it's ready to be used. So all this stuff got installed as part of that. And if I look in my personal folder, you look in your personal folder, I should see here my AWS Observability, which has got today's date on it. And again, just for fun, I'll start with Amazon Overview, AWS Account Overview, and I should start seeing some data in here. What kind of data am I seeing about my AWS environment that I stood up? My regional overview information. What kind of data am I seeing here? Incoming activity, resource activities, all kinds of good stuff. And I can look in these other folders here and I can get a sense for what's happening. I can go into my global intelligence here. And under my global intelligence, if I can find my overview, those are errors. Okay. It's my availability of the first one. I can see, for example, what's going on with CloudTrail. And again, it's nothing to report. There's no problems. Yay, good deal. But the point is this all happened as a result of standing up that AWS environment in lab one. Not only did we do stand up the AWS environment, but we stood all this stuff up in Sumo Logic. It's all transparent. It's all done for me. It's ready to go. Okay. So that's one of the things we wanted you to realize. So hopefully you guys see it. Lab one is a success. We are in good shape. Now, the other thing I want to do while we're still waiting for this lovely terminal to run is I want to take a 10-minute break. You don't mind if we take a 10-minute break, do you? Didn't think so. So when this counter gets back down to 0, please come back here and we will continue. But I'll see you back here in about 9 minutes and 53 seconds. Have a good break. Mikey, you okay? Do I have to dispatch an ambulance?
Oops, sorry.
Oh, don't worry about it. I just hope you're okay.
Yeah, a little bit of a head cold this week.
Okay. I can feel your pain. My wife is asthmatic, so we have inhalers and nebulizers nearby.
Gotcha.
So I understand. All right, folks, break time is over. Hopefully we are all back. Let me check and see how our cluster is doing. Our cluster is just about there. It's putting things together, just waiting for confirmation here. So just takes a few more minutes. One thing I did want to mention to you all, I forgot to mention it, back when we were doing lab 1, right? Back when we went into our Cloudformation template, we built all this cool stuff out and everything else. One thing I did not mention, and that is to make sure that when you start this process, that you pick the region that where you want to stand up in lab 1, your AWS environment. So it's an oversight on my part. I forgot to point it out. But one of the important parts of this, one of the prerequisites is what region do you want to stand this up in, right? So again, wanted to point out that you pick that region. Again, by default, it's probably your closest region. Then you go to your template and you run the template and all that sort of thing, and it builds it out for you. But I forgot to point out about this pull down here. So just wanted to be honest and mention that, because again, comes in the form of a great test question. And I want to make sure you guys all get credit for it. Okay. So lab 1 is done. We saw the results. Lab 2 is percolating right along. And by the way, you guys, hopefully, if you want to, you guys can go out to the Sumo Logic environment. And even if you didn't send one up yourself, you should be able to see my Explorer. So you should be able to see JWM28 here, and you can see somebody else has set one up. You should be able to do a search in the collectors under, again, the navigation panel here under Manage Data under Collection. Do a search for JWM, and you should see my collector and sources, particularly if I do JWM28. Get rid of those extraneous characters there. So, and you can see that. The only thing right now you can't see is this app, but if I wanted to, I could share it with everybody. In fact, that's what I'll do real quick, is I'll take this app and I'll share it with the entire organization for right now, just to, and I'll give you the ability to edit it. So if you want to know about these permissions and all that stuff, we teach this in our fundamentals class. So there you go. Hopefully you guys will have access to this. You'll see it under your recents, recently shared. I've shared it now with you all, so you can be able to see it there. Okay. So you guys can play with that if you want to. Those of you who were not able to do the that lab 1. Okay. So I'm still waiting here for lab 2, this part of lab 2 to finish. Now, good news. Remember I said that if you already have a cluster installed, this is already done for you. So after this cluster is up and installed, after this is done, it'll take a few more minutes, then you and I can focus on what we need to do to bring the data into Sumo, which isn't a whole heck of a lot. Okay. So like I said, most of the exercise we're doing here is to set up the cluster. And that's basically where we are right now. Okay. In fact, once the cluster is set up, I can then look at my pods here. So on page 24, I'm going to go ahead and look at step 2. I'm going to swipe over that code and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to take a look at it here. Okay. So when this thing is done, and it should be done here in just a couple more minutes, and then we'll go from there. By the way, while we're waiting, what questions have you? Feel free to unmute your mics and ask any questions that you have so far to make sure that we're in good shape. Wow, quiet group. Okay. All right, like I said, I'm just waiting for this to finish up. It shouldn't be too much longer. Obviously, the bigger the image size, and you may have recalled I grabbed 2 extra large. The bigger the image size, the longer it takes to stand up. So we tried to grab a size that was fairly small. One other thing too, as you create these things, obviously it's using your AWS account, there may be cost associated with this. And so what happens is that when we finish up lab 2, specifically lab 3, we use this, we're going to tell you to go ahead and destroy your cluster, and we'll give you a command to do that. So we do try to housekeep on things if you want to. In fact, for those of you who did do lab 1, if in lab 1 you saw your results and you're very happy with those results, you are welcome to go in here and find your parent node and go ahead and destroy it, delete it if you want to, and tear it all down so it doesn't cost you any extra money. Once you're happy with your results, you can do that. I don't want to, incur anybody any extra charges and things like that. All right. Looks like we're finishing up. Yay. Not quite done yet. Now I'm waiting for the nodes to contact me back and say, yep, I'm ready. I'll get back to a prompt here in just a second. Well, maybe more than a second. Probably a minute or two, maybe 3. A watched pot never boils, right? But it's close. I've got my node created, just waiting for a response. And as I said before, if you already had a cluster set up, this is already done for you. So you don't have to do any of this. Again, it should be done here in a minute or two. But like I said, if those of you if you want to tear down your lab 1, you certainly can. And when we get around here in lab 2, actually start of lab 3, once we set up our Kubernetes cluster for tracing, then we can tear that. We'll have a command for you to tear that down. And then the third lab that we're going to do here is we're going to set up a non-Kubernetes environment. We already have the image. You'll stand up and spin up that AMI image in AWS, and we'll use that for lab 3 and setting up tracing. So try to make things fairly easy for you. Good. All right, back to my prompt. This is finally done. I've got my Kubernetes cluster set up. And the next command that's there is it wants me to see if I can get pods. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and see if lo and behold, there are my pods. They are up there running. I have a cluster. Yay. As I said before, if you already got a cluster running, you don't have to worry about this. So there I am on page 24, step 2, we're good to go. Now, if you got a cluster running, here's what we need to do to make this work for Sumo Logic. 2 commands here that we need to run. We need to add to the Helm repo information about Sumo Logic, so it knows our metadata tags and all that sort of thing. So hang on a second. Again, it broke it up, separate lines. So let me go out here, paste this in, get rid of that, add a space. I'll add this command to the chat. But basically what we're doing here is we're basically adding Sumo Logic's metadata into our Helm repo so it knows about Sumo Logic. Okay, that's all we're doing here. Let me do a Control C, Paste that puppy in, run it. Okay, it says Sumo logic already exists, which it did because I did this before. Let me also put this in the chat box for those of you who are following along with me. Bear with me a second. There you go. There's the command that you can put in your terminal, your PuTTY, and that command should run without problems. Now, that is one of the two commands that you need to run to set this up. The other command that you need to run is we are going to invoke a Helm Upgrade command. And this command, let me Control-C it here real quick. This command also needs to go to a text file because I need to clean it up. Okay. And I am going to, let's get rid of okay. So here on this command, I need to specify the name of my cluster that I just created. And I believe my cluster is called the JWM28. Now, of course, I can't remember if it's a JWM capital 28 or lower 28. It's JWM28, lowercase, good. So JWM28. The other thing I need to do is I need to add my Sumo logic access key and my Sumo logic access ID in here. So I've got to go back here to my original file. Control-C. And again, when I put this up there, you'll need to take out my access ID information. And you'll need to put in your access ID and access key information. Otherwise, this won't work. Okay. And by the way, let me also get rid of that little sign there. Let me take this command and let me copy it and let me try to run it first. Okay. Okay, good. It says the collection does not exist. It's installing it now. Good. So what this command does is it invokes the Helm Upgrade command, which means if you don't have Helm, it's going to install it. If you have Helm, it's going to upgrade it. And what it's going to do is it's going to add the collection of Sumo logic based on the metadata, the repository you brought in before, using your Sumo logic credentials. So basically, this is adding your collector so that we can bring data from your Kubernetes cluster into Sumo logic. That is what this is doing. Okay. And once this command is done, then we will be able to go out and look for our collector and see it. By the way, here is the command. Again, please change your cluster name to reflect your cluster name, and please change the access key and the access ID to reflect your access ID and access key, please. Okay. And again, this will take a minute or so. And so again, we are here on step 3, where we're doing this Helm upgrade. And as I said, it's updating my Helm with the configuration. If Helm was installed, if Helm was not installed, it'll go ahead and start installing it. And it's going to add my collector. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look for our collector here in just a minute. So in fact, while I'm waiting, because patience is not one of my strong suits, if I go out here to manage data, I go out here to collection, if I do a search again for JWM28, now I'm seeing my K8 training lab collector. This brought in my collector, so now I'm bringing in my Kubernetes data. Okay, and sure enough, my command is done. So now it's installed my collector here. for my Kubernetes data. Now I can install in my apps under my app catalog, under Kubernetes, I can install my Kubernetes app, my Kubernetes control plane app, and I can start seeing my Kubernetes data here. Also, under my Explore tab, without having to install those apps, I can go into Kubernetes, any of these views, namespace view, deployment view, node view, doesn't make any difference view. And here in a minute or two, I should see my Kubernetes cluster show up here. It's not there yet, but it's going to be there soon. So again, that same name that I created before with JWM28. This does take a minute to get there. It is. Okay, so it's finally here. And again, I'll start getting some data here. So you don't have to install the control plane app and the Kubernetes app. It's just if you want to for additional things. Any questions about Lab 2? Okay, now that we've got Kubernetes installed, what we want to do is we want to turn on tracing. Okay, we want to turn on tracing, and we want to set up observability with tracing. Now, there's two parts to this lab. The first part's very easy. We're going to take that Kubernetes environment that we have, and we're going to set up tracing for it. That's all we're going to do. And it's a very simple command, very easy to do. Okay. And then after that, we're done with that cluster. We can delete that cluster and everything else. The second part of Lab 3 is that we're going to set up tracing on a non-Kubernetes environment. So we're going to go out and we're going to find an AMI image that's got everything loaded on it, pre-built on it, and we're going to go ahead and install it and configure it. All right. So basically, we've got Lab 2 done. We can see all the results of Lab 2. Now we want to turn on tracing for our Kubernetes environment. Okay. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do here. Is bear with me a second. I copy this code. I'm going to go back to my terminal, and I'm going to rerun or up arrow to rerun my Helm command, except that I'm going to paste in, whoops, this last argument, which again, it didn't do me justice. So let me do it this way. I love word wrapping in text files. Okay, so there it should be the full command. And basically all this is doing is when we install Helm, tracing is not enabled by default. So all we have to do is to tell it to enable tracing by adding this set Sumo logic.traces.enabled flag equal to true. And so now we would get data coming in from our Kubernetes environment. This is all we have to do to make that happen. Okay, so it'll take a second or two. Now, the other problem I've got is that that Kubernetes environment isn't really running anything like a web server like that. So I'm not going to see any tracing data in here. Once this command runs, and if I go to new, and if I go to my service map, I won't see my Kubernetes environment until some data comes in here and generates a trace. Now, if I have a web server on there, if I have some sort of transactional service running on there and stuff like that, I'll start seeing that data. But I don't have anything running on that Kubernetes cluster. We just stood up that cluster. We didn't install any apps or anything on top of that cluster. So this is basically why 3A is okay. Now in Lab 3B, we will set up traces and we will see traces in here. Okay, so we'll do that. So waiting for this little command to finish up. And oh, by the way, in Lab 3A, after we get this done, we can then, if we want to, delete the cluster. So here on page 27, under step Roman numeral 3, you can delete your cluster if you want to and save yourself some money. This cluster was used using your AWS account, right? You want to save some money. I get it. Okay. This takes us, by the way, to Lab 3B. So I'm just going to wait and see if this is done. Okay, good. This is done. Now, again, if I had something running on that Kubernetes cluster, I should be able to go in here and I would start seeing trace data from my Kubernetes cluster. But because we've got nothing running on that Kubernetes cluster, we're not seeing any trace data, and we won't, because there's nothing installed on that Kubernetes cluster. We will show you some trace data here in just a few minutes. Just bear with me. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do here, just as a matter of, because I'm a financially conservative individual, I'm going to take this command. And I bet you I have to probably clean it up in a text editor here. Make sure there's a space from your character to the next tag, okay? And so here, you and I can, come on, thank you. Run this command and delete that cluster. Save ourselves some money, okay? And that takes care of that terminal window. We don't care about that terminal window anymore. And that is lab 3A. So we wanted to clean up after ourselves. Now in lab 3B, what we're going to do is we're going to set up tracing and trace points using Open Telemetry in a non-Kubernetes environment. So for this, we're going to go out to our AWS console. We're going to find an image and we're going to launch that AWS image. Okay. By the way, just for timing purposes, theoretically, I should be able to put you on the exam in about 20 minutes. Truth be told, it'll probably be about 30 minutes before I get you to that exam. So what happens, ladies and gentlemen, is you get to log into your AWS console. And in your AWS console, under services, select EC2. And if you don't have an AWS console, you can just watch. Here under services, EC2, scroll down, you'll find there's some AMI images. And what you want to do is you want to go where it says owned by me. You want to change this to public images. Now, here's where it gets fun. I don't know what region you are in, or if you're in any of these regions. Okay. We've got a few of these regions defined. So if I go to our documentation, you'll see that if you're in US East 1, you can search for this AMI image. If you're in US East 2, you can search for this, this AMI image down here. If you're in US West 1, US West 2, EU Central 1, EU North 1, EU East 1, EU West 2. These are the ones that we've got set up. Okay. We can add others for the other regions in Asia Pac and India, but right now we wanted to run this first to make sure it works, and then we'll deploy it to all the various regions that we have. I happen to be in US East 1, so I'm going to grab this AMI file here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it, just paste it enough to add a tag to it. And I'll do a search. And hang on, why am I not seeing it? Make sure I'm getting the full thing here. There's a space in there. That's why. Undo typing. There we go. There we go. Nothing is going to be easy, huh? So I'm going to take this AMI file. And by the way, in future, just so you guys know, it's a mistake on my part, I'll space these out so you see the AMI file listing on one line. So that's my fault. I'll fix that. I'll edit that out. And so now there it is. It says illuminate observability. And so you and I are going to take this image either from US East 1, US West 1, US West 2, EU West 1, EU West 2, whichever image that you want. And we're going to launch this image. So first of all, has everybody got this okay that wants it? Can everybody find that image or an image of that? Okay, but take that as a yes. Then we're going to click on the launch button. Here in the choose instance type, per the directions, we are going to select T2 large. So T2 large, not extra large, T2 large. Then we'll go ahead and click next configuration instance details. I'm going to take all the defaults here. Click next, add storage. Take the defaults here. Next, add tags. If you want to add a tag, you're certainly welcome to do so, a key value pair. So you can search for this in your environment. You certainly can do that. Maybe I'll do something like name for Illuminate. You don't have to, but again, it makes it easier for you to search. Okay. Next, configure security groups. And here is where we do need to do a little bit of work. So by default, it'll let us connect via SSH on port 22. But we want to add a new rule. This image has a web server on it. So I need to add a rule, and the port range that I want is port 8080. I'm going to sit there and have it use an Apache server running on port 8080 that I want to connect to. Now, by default, this is all open to the world. I don't want it to be open to the world. I want it to be open only to my IP address, both of these. So I can connect to my image, but nobody else can for testing this thing out. Okay. Just makes it more secure for right now. So you want to add the second line, make it port 8080. You want to change both of these my sources to my IP. And let me get back up here. So we are on page 33 of your PDF. We will now click review and launch. Here's my image. Here's my information. Here's my summary. I can now click launch, and I will click launch. But when I do that, it's going to ask me, what do I do for a key pair to be able to connect in through my SSH? Now, I can choose an existing key pair if I have it, which I do, and that's what I'm going to do. Or I can choose to create a new key pair. And if you choose to create a new key pair, whatever name you give it, make sure you download that key pair, because you're going to need that key pair to connect to your remote host. So I'm going to choose to use an existing key pair. I already have a key pair that I can use. If you got one, great. If you don't have one, you're going to need to create a new key pair, and you want to download it. And I'm acknowledging that I have access to this, and it's not AWS's fault. So then I can launch my instance, and that's what it's going to do. In AWS console, it's going to launch this instance. I can click on this link to go see my instance. I can refresh this from time to time and see it's being built. It's in the process of being stood up. I can refresh it again and refresh it again, and eventually it will say it's running. So it's building out this instance for us. Okay, now it is running. Now I can check mark this, and if I want to, I can choose to connect to it. Now, here's where we're going to use terminal again, or PuTTY, depending on what you've got. So let me close some of this stuff up. Let me leave my terminal window open. That terminal window is still doing its thing. So let me open up a new terminal window. And on this new terminal window, my private key is located in my downloads directory. So again, if I do an ls here, I see I've got a downloads directory, and I want to change to my downloads directory. And again, this is Unix, so it's going to be case sensitive. So in my directory here, if I do an ls star.pem, there are some public and private key pairs. The one I want is the EC2 key pair. I want to make sure I'm in that directory, otherwise this isn't going to work. So back to my AWS environment here. Again, I was looking at my environment, my image. If I click connect, it takes me here, and it gives me an example of an SSH command that I can use to connect to this. Now, there is one little stipulation here. It's using the root account. We want to use the EC2 user account, but I'm going to take this code. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to my terminal. I'm going to paste this in. Then I'm going to backspace over the word root. And I'm going to change this to EC2-USER. Because if you try to log into root, it's not going to let you. But if you try to log in as EC2 user, it will. And it says, oh, okay, I was able to establish a connection. I'm able to encrypt and see data. You sure you want to connecting? Yes, I am. So we'll type in, well, yes. And it will then should connect us in. Hold on a second. Hold on. Oh, I know why. I know. Hang on a second. EC2 user. Yep. EC2-user. There we go. There we go. Okay, good. So we're all connected in. Yeah. Thank you, Nada. So we're logged in. We're now connected. We can now run commands on the new image. Now, good news. Everything has been set up for you with one small exception. If I do an ls here, if I do an ls to see my files, you'll see that we've already installed the Open Telemetry jar file. We've already installed the config.yaml. We got to do something about that. We've installed Tomcat. There's an Apache Tomcat directory, and underneath that, there's a binaries directory for that. And then there's a set environment.sh file. These are files that we will use to set up telemetry. So I will walk you through the process of setting this stuff up, but this has all been set up for us. We've already installed the JDKs. We've already installed the Apache servers. We did a wget to get all the applications, all of that good stuff. Okay. Let me get to my documentation here. So we've got this image stood up. We're able to connect to this image. We are in good shape. Now, they have us test, if we want to, our Apache web server. Okay. You don't need to worry about testing the web server right now. You could, but I'm not going to worry about it. So I'm going to move on to page 40. And in page 40, there are three things we're going to do. We're going to generate a collector and a source inside of Sumo Logic that's going to generate an endpoint URL. We're going to add that URL to our config.yaml file. And then we're going to sit there and make sure that we've got Open Telemetry collector binaries installed, which we do, but I'm going to show you where to get them, where to install them, and we're going to run them. And that's then going to set us up for telemetry at the collector level. Then we're going to set things up at the application level. So here, what I need to do and what you need to do, or what we need to do, is we need to go back into our Sumo Logic training environment. We need to go back into collection. And we need to set up a new collector. So you can add a collector. This collector that you're going to add is a hosted collector. We're dealing with a cloud. Hosted collector. And you can see it doesn't ask us for much. It asks us for a name. Right? And per your book, it says provide a name for the collector. You know, I recommend you put your initials in there. So maybe JWM, OT, for Open Telemetry collector, okay? And you can leave description, category, all that stuff alone. You don't have to assign it to a budget. Don't worry about the time zone. and you can click save. Now, great. And then it says, would you like to add a new data source to your collector? And yes, we do. We're going to go ahead and click OK here. The data source that you want is this HTTP traces, not HTTP logs and metrics, but HTTP traces. So click on that, and we're going to give this thing a name. So again, I'm going to put my initials in here, call it traces, whatever you want to call it, okay? And you can put a source category in here. We normally advocate putting a source category, but to tell you the truth, the source category is going to do a lot of good, okay? But just for fun here, I will say, here's my initials / traces. Okay. And again, put your initials, give this thing a name, click save. And when you do this, this is going to give you a big old URL. This URL you want to copy and you want to save it somewhere. Okay. Save it to a text file, save it someplace. I don't care. In a minute, I'll show you where else you can get it if you need to get it again. Okay. All right. So what we want to do is, again, here we click OK. So now we have created this new collector. In fact, let me just do a little housekeeping here. Here I've got, see, I've got two OT collectors. I'm going to take this old one that I've done previously and I'm going to delete it. Okay, just trying to do a little housekeeping here. And again, the collector really doesn't make a difference. It's this URL, and if I say show URL, it's this URL that we're going to connect to in our server. So we're going to take this URL, and again, if I need to copy it, I can. And we're going to go out here to our image, back to terminal, back to putty, wherever we are. And remember, we're in that directory where our config.yaml file is. So I want to open up, I do vi space config.yaml. And if you do it right, it should open it up and you should see text there. If you did something wrong, you get a blank screen. But you should see a bunch of text here, and your cursor should be located at the traces _ endpoint : space. Now, again, we're using the VI editor. So what I want to do is I want to do a Shift I to put myself in insert mode. That moves my cursor to the front of this line. I want to make sure I have a space after my colon, and then I'm going to paste my URL. So it's going to be traces _ endpoint : space, and then my URL. And what this is doing is this config.yaml file, and I'll show you where we got this config.yaml file so you understand where it came from and all that good stuff, okay? This is going to then be able to know where to send my trace data to, what collector, what source. That's basically what's going on. Now, I need to get out of insert mode, so I'm going to hit the escape key. I'm going to hold down my shift key. I'm going to do a colon WQ, which is write and quit. And now I've edited my config.yaml file. It is good to go. Okay. Now, let me explain where this config.yaml file came from and where the binaries came from. So if I go back to my directions, again, we created our endpoint URL here, created our host, did all that good stuff. We saved that. So here it says in this link, here's the sample config file link. And if I click here, this takes me out to GitHub to a copy of a raw config.yaml file. So normally I would click on this, click on the raw button. That's going to give me the raw text. I can do a Control-A to copy, select everything, a Control-C to copy it. Then I would go to my VI editor and VI space config.yaml. It would open a blank file, and then I would paste this information in. Then I would go down here to where my endpoint URL is here, right? Right here. And I would change that and paste in my URL that I created earlier. So that's what we've got to do. That's one piece. Again, where did I get that information from? I actually got it from my directions right here. By the way, you'll also find that if you look at our documentation for setting up tracing, it's in there as well. Now, the next thing it wants us to do is it wants us to download some, actually, here's my GitHub for my binaries. But the next thing that it was going to want us to do, and again, we went into vi config.yaml, and we pasted in that URL, and we got out of there, okay? The next thing we need to do is install the executable for Open Telemetry Collector. Now, again, here's a link to the documentation. So here I am in Sumo Logic. I'm in the traces chapter, setting up traces on other environments. And if I scroll down here, again, we set up our HTTP traces, right? We did all that, got our URL. Again, here's our config.yaml. There's an outline of how we get there. We replaced our endpoint URL. Life is good. Now, here, non-containerized events is what we're going to use to get our binary. And so if I click on this link in here, you'll see that there's some pre-release versions of this. We don't want to use a pre-release version. So I'm going to ignore all the pre-release versions, and I'm going to go down to the first one I come to that's not pre-released. So version 22.0 Sumo. And if I click on this, I see that there is a trace jar file here for AMD 64 Darwin. There's a Linux AMD 64, a Linux AMR 64, and so forth and so on. So depending on what your operating system is and depending on what's going on, which processor you have, we have a AMD 64. So we would normally right click on this. We would normally copy this link address to this file, and then we would do a wget in terminal to download that to our machine, and that's where this file comes from. That's how that file came to be. Again, this image already has it for you. Any questions so far? Okay, I realize it's getting a little long in the tooth here, so just bear with me. I'm almost there. Next thing we need to do is we need to run this. So again, the documentation describes, the wget process. Also, you've got to modify it and make sure it's executable, right? The shell file. We've already done that on the image, so you don't have to worry about that. But here on page 52, step 6, here is the command that we are going to run in our terminal window that is going to launch our agent. So we run this command, and by the way, if you want, I'll put it in the chat box. And in a minute, it will run, and our agent's ready to receive things. So there we go. We're up. We're beginning running and ready to process data. So from a collector perspective, we're ready to receive data. Now, the only other thing I got to do is I got to modify the application to tell the application that we want to enable tracing. Okay. So I got to take care of the application side of this. Let me close this up. Again, this is all in our documentation. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward to follow. But basically it's there. And of course, this is nice because it's pretty much a cheat sheet. Now, what we need to do is we are going to run a Tomcat app as our web server. And we want to let Tomcat know that it's going to be changed in such a way that we want to send our trace data to Sumo Logic. So you can download an agent jar file if you want to, or you can modify the executable. And again, we've already downloaded the jar file. We've already set this stuff up for you. What I need to do is I need to go to another terminal window because this one's up and running. I don't want to mess this terminal window up. And so what I can do here is under shell, I can say I want to open up a new tab here. And again, I want to go to my downloads directory. Let's try that again. Well, I'm already in my downloads directory because I opened up a new tab. And I want to connect to my remote environment. So again, I'm going to copy this. And again, I'm going to change this instead of root to EC2-user, not @. There we go. I'm going to connect in. And again, I remind you that if I do a listing here, there's a couple things that I need. Number one, if I change directory to my Apache -Tomcat, and by the way, I assume most of you are aware, so if I type in a command in Unix and I hit the tab bar, it will finish my command for me. And there's a binary directory there. So now that I'm in that bin directory, here is where all of my information for Tomcat to run is. And if I do a listing, I can see I got a whole bunch of files here. Okay. Now, normally, you notice I've got a couple of set environment files here. Okay. In fact, let me do a vi set environment.sh so I can see what's in there. This file is ready to go. This is ready. It's going to create a service name called Sumo training. And so all I have to do now is to start my application up. Now, truth be told, this file is there. It's ready for me. But normally, you would have to modify that file. And so if we went out here to our documentation, it would tell us how to modify our file. And we would take this code that's right here and we would modify it. Now, so here actually take this code right here and it works just fine. So we would modify this code and we would be all set. This has already been done for us. So again, I can just do a shift:quit to get out of here. And now all I need to do is start up my Apache web server. Start up your Apache web server. It's a /startup.sh. That starts up my web server. That's going to launch my Apache Tomcat server. If I go back in here where my host name is, and I copy this, and if I open up a new tab and I paste that host name information in and I put a colon and go to port 8080, this will then connect me or should connect me to my Apache Tomcat server. And I'm going to go ahead and click on a couple of these buttons to generate some errors, to generate some data, generate some trace data. And I should, in fact, see some results. So I'm just clicking back and forth here, playing around to get some data. Now, if you and I go into Sumo Logic, and if we go in here to service map, in a minute, it may take a minute here, I should eventually see my training information. Might take a minute for this to come up. Does take a minute or so. No, it's not it. Not it. Patience isn't one of my big virtues here. But it will show up. Or if I need to, let me just do this. You shut down my server. Okay, shutting down my server, making sure everything looks good here. Also, while I'm here, let me copy. I'm just bear with me a second, guys. I'm just trying to troubleshoot here a little bit. See if I'm just being impatient or what. But this command, by the way, is in your guide. Even though the set environment variable .sh file's in here, I'm going to copy the other file over. Oops, hang on a second. Let's put a period there. There we go. And let me launch it again. I'm just seeing if there's a problem here. Okay, my server is back up and running. Let me go back here for a second. Let me copy this. Let me close this. Let me go back out here again. First time it launches, it should take a moment because tracing is now enabled. And again, let me go out here and click on some buttons and see if perchance I can generate some trace data. And there it is, Sumo training. So over here, I now have Sumo training. And if I click on that, I can open this up in traces. And so now I can see the traces of my website and basically what I've been doing. Whether I've been getting 403s on those pages or 200s, which means the pages work fine. So when I go here and the page works fine, I get a 200. When I get server status, I get a 403. And so I can now see that information in my traces. And I can see if I want to, by going into traces, where this had occurred and what may have caused it. So we've enabled tracing for our Apache web server app. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is lab number 3. I realize it's been a long 2 hours and almost 12 minutes. So what questions have you? What questions have you? All right. Now, again, we've got this tracing set up. If I want, I can delete my collectors. I can go out here to my AWS area. I can delete that image if I want to, save myself some money. I'm going to leave this image run for a little while in case you guys want to see it, play it with it, whatever. But basically, that is the gist of the course. So in this course, as I've said, we've really focused on 3 things. Bear with me here till I get drive to that. Just give me a second here. You know, we've installed a AWS Observability Solution. We've also took a while to set up a Kubernetes cluster. And then once we got the Kubernetes cluster set up, we could start bringing that data into Sumo Logic. And that built out my Explorer tabs and all that sort of thing. We then turned tracing on our Kubernetes cluster, but because we didn't have an application on top of it, we couldn't see any trace data. Then we installed tracing on a non-Kubernetes cluster. So that's basically what we did. And again, depending on your background and things that you might be interested in, you know, you can talk about software development optimization. We've got some post-Illuminate search jams and workshops coming up. And of course, we've got a whole plethora the next 2 days of workshops and information about Sumo Logic, certification classes, workshop, expert workshops, all kinds of wonderful things in the next 2 days. So I seriously hope you take advantage of it. Beyond that, like I said, we've got some things coming on in October. We're doing some regional search jams. So those of you in EMEA and Europe, we look forward to seeing you again. Those of you in the Western and Central US, Eastern US, APAC, certainly we'll see you soon. I believe in November, folks in India are doing some search jams as well. So we just didn't put it on the schedule yet. So the point is, and again, if you're in India and you want to go to the EMEA, the APAC search jams, it works out well for your time zone, please do. please do. So otherwise, that pretty much wraps up the class. The only thing I want to do is get you all ready to take your certification exam. So are there any questions before I start steering you toward taking your certification exam? Any questions at all? Okay. Thank you, Nanda. All right. So what I want you to do is right now you're logged in as training admin, some crazy number. And if training admin takes the exam and gets credit for it, that doesn't mean you get credit for it. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to log out of Sumo. I want you to log out of our training environment. So where it says training admin down here in the corner, and again, if it's not opened up, feel free to click up here on the hamburger menu or Sumo Logic. And I want you to sign out of our training environment. Then I want you to sign into your company's training environment. So I want you to log into your company's training environment. Any of you who do not have a company training environment that you can use, you can sign up for one. You can sign up for a free trial environment, and you can use that for taking the test. So here is the URL if you need an environment to play with. Okay, it's free, my favorite price. Now, once you log into your company's Sumo Logic environment or this free training environment, and I'm going to go ahead and log in as me into an environment so that when I look down here, there's my first name and there's my last name, which means if I take an exam, by gosh and by golly, I'm going to get credit for it. Okay. Now, since I'm logged in here, to get to the certification exams, I want to click on the house, home tab, click on certification, click on get certified. Now this takes me right to our learning management system. And here in our learning management system, it tells you what the current password is. So next month in October, when we change our training analyst password, we'll update that. And we'll probably do the same with the training admin password. Bear with us. But if I scroll down here at the bottom of these tiles, there's one called observability. And here in observability, we had the fundamentals exam, which we ran that class this morning. And we've got the observability administration exam, which we're running right now. And if I click on that, it says here before you start, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Let me back up for a second. There'll be a little registration button here. And you can click on that registration button and boom, you're registered. Doesn't take but a split second. Then, and I don't want you to click here with me just yet. I want you to watch for just a second. Up here in the upper right-hand corner is your profile. And so you see it recognizes who I am, first name, last name. I uploaded my picture because I'm a narcissistic guy, but that's okay. And I can see all of my exams that I've passed. I can view my certificates. I can add them to my LinkedIn profile, all of that good stuff, okay? Now, if I scroll to the bottom here, there's a done button that I can click on. When I want to take this exam or any of our exams, before you start, it tells you there's so many questions, you got so long to complete it. The exam is open book, open notes, open slides. That's why we tried to tell you where the slides and stuff were. Also, I will be here proctoring the exam. So if you've got questions and you get stuck on one, ask me. We want to try to help you. We want you to be successful. All right. And again, the exams are presented lots of different ways. Passing score is 70%. When you're ready, click next. And I'm ready, I'll click next. And it's going to take me and say, okay, here you go. You got 20 questions. You got an hour or 60 minutes to complete it in. Knock yourself out. I am ready to start. So match the Sumo Logic Kubernetes app to its description. The control plane app takes care of the master node. The Kubernetes app takes care of the worker nodes. Now I'm just going to answer a couple of questions here, and there's a reason why I'm doing this. I don't want you to take the test just yet. Bear with me, okay? When is a single Open Telemetry collector, and by the way, you'll find this in our documentation, right? A single collector recommended method, okay? Not when we've got lots of volume. It's typically when we've got low volume, right? So low volume is what I'm looking for. I'm going to answer both of those questions. Then I'm going to go over here to the right, and I'm going to submit my answers. Now, I only answered 2 questions, so obviously I'm going to fail. All right. But there's a reason why. I can see what questions here I got right. I can see what questions I got wrong. But here's the kicker. When you take this and you pass this exam, and I am very proud of you, don't forget to click the Submit Results button, because when you click the Submit Results button, it adds it to your profile. If you don't click that Submit Results button, it's not part of your profile. That exam did not happen. So make sure you get credit for it. Click that Submit Results file so it's in your profile. I wish the product did this automatically, but it doesn't. Okay, it is what it is. That's the reason I went through this long litany. One other little thing. Sometimes when you're at Sumo Logic and you click Get Certified, it takes you here. And there, go back and you click and it takes you here. That is actually a security feature. It's not a bug, it's a security feature. We need your permission to move you from one environment to another. So how we fix that, how you fix that, is you're going to go into your Sumo Logic environment. You're going to go into the navigation panel here. And again, if you need to open it, click on the hamburger menu. And you're going to go down to Help. And you're going to click on Community. When you click on Community, you will get a pop-up window that will appear. I don't, because I did this a long time ago. It's fixed. But for you, it may not be fixed. So you're going to get a pop-up window that says, we need to verify your email. Little button on it. You click on that button. It's going to send you an email within about a minute. Find that email, and the body of that email also has a button. Click on that button. This problem will now go away. Now, when you go into Sumo from here on out, you go into Home, you go into Certification, you click Get Certified, poof, it takes you into our learning management system. And you can take all the exams that you want. Any questions? All right. Again, you've got the next hour to take your exam. But before we leave, I just wanted to take a moment here, turn my camera on, and thank you all for spending the last 2.5 hours with us. And again, we got a lot more things to talk about here at Illuminate. I hope you enjoy it. I want to thank you for your hard work and efforts, and we hope to see you in a class again real soon. Because I'll be here for the next hour while you're taking the exam. Please be safe, have fun, and hope to see you again.